Alright, I'm going to show you how I made this ornate vase. We started with a cube and I applied a basic color checker pattern just so we could see that everything's lined up properly. And when we zoom in here, we could see some of the faces are rotated, so I have to go through and select each face and then in UV hit rotate -90. So I have them all lined up. And this is going to create, all his faces share the same UV space. So this is going to create a tiling effect. So when I paint, I only have to paint on 1/4 of the vase. So I'm just going to rescale a little bit here so I have place to put the squares from the top and bottom, and you could draw on them still. I have a fairly large texture size here. It's 4K. You probably don't need all that, but I figured I just wanted it to be a crisp, clear image after poly painting. So I'll just shrink it down up here in this corner and just use some of this UV space. There may be a little bit of stretching. It's not a huge deal. If you plan this out, this UV image here actually shows you quite well if something gets stretched. So if you're really careful, you could do this without messing up your texture. Or when you're done, you could bake this down, get some normals out of it, but it's not too bad. I threw a circle down, and I'm going to throw it in the 0 position, and then I need to throw my box in the 0 position also. I'm going to use that to make sure that I have a circle. So scale it up to the outer corner here and then go back into edit on the box. And Control R, throw some loops in both directions. And then you can Alt click to select one loop at a time. Scale only in the X and then in the Y to get it round. And it's pretty easy. And I can delete that ring. I don't need it anymore. So now we got a pretty round object. Now move it up off the grid a little bit. And grab these top faces and drag them up a little. So we've got some heights to cut this up and reshape it. I'm just going to slap Control R, slap some loop cuts in there to scale. I'm just going to scale these. Kind of has the same effect. Like scale up a little base there. I'm gonna put a subsurf on there so I can kind of see what's happening as I cut. And I wanted that sharper, so I brought a loop down to it, and I want to actually put a cut in between there and scale that down to make it look like it's almost like a separated object. You could separate the object if you wanted to. I'm not worried about being that detailed with it. I'm just trying to isolate the top. It's going to be kind of like a ball shape at the top. Maybe a little neck. I'm not following any guide here. I'm just kind of shaping to what I think looks neat. I try to use Shift V to loop slide. Now it doesn't really work on this shape because it wants to follow one line, and not all the vertexes will follow it. See, so it doesn't really work here. I think there's some settings I could play with to make that work, but I didn't plan ahead for that. So I'm just gonna loop cut it instead the rest of the time, because try even cuts, doesn't work. Clamp, doesn't work. Remember to keep your correct UVs on when you're using Shift V to loop slide, and you won't mess up your textures. No stretching. Yeah, so that's not gonna work. I think I try this too, but it pretty much has the same thing. Offset edge slide. Oh, that just basically chamfers it. That's fine though. I'm not really worried about my polygon count, so I can just throw some extra loops in there if I have to and keep it nice and even. So there's nothing wrong with that. So pull the top down a little bit and make it a little bit more round. I'm not going to try to get this perfectly round, but just trying to get the basic shape. You could do this a number of ways. This is just how I'm modeling it. A lot of people would use a curve and I think it's called rotate in Blender. It's like a lot of programs call it something like lathe. I believe Studio Max will call it lathe, where you'll draw the basic curved shape of the outline and then just rotate it around the center pivot point to create the perfectly round edge. But this gets the effect that I'm looking for. I'm really just worried about showing you how to do the fine script. So I'm going to try to put a bead of separation in here. It'll almost look like a lid. Throw some loops in there to, if I pull them up, then that makes it sharper. I'll drag this up a little bit. And throw one down here. Wasn't quite thick enough for me. I think down here I kind of want a bead of separation also. Maybe like a groove. Let's throw a bead here. Just some random details, nothing special. I made a couple bad clicks there. I hit Alt Z. And put one last piece up here. And let's take a step back and look at how it looks. Looks pretty good, but the top is kind of large. Makes it look like a circus tent. It's just Alt click in polyface mode. Oops. Oh, I should be just clicking those. I just selected part of the side. Let's do that again. Alt click on that edge and just select the faces on top. I'm just going to drag them up. I'm not real worried about the texture here. Scale it. If I was actually going to use a texture, I'd be more worried about it, but I'm basically just applying a flat color, and the only places that will matter are the places that I'm going to paint a texture on, so I'm not really hurting it. Like that shape a little bit better. Alright, I already had the texture loaded, but we're going to go to fill, and we're going to fill it with white. Basically, we're going to take our inverted alphas. When you're using a paint bucket on a 4K texture, it takes a second to load. We're going to take inverted alphas to paint over with. So we fill the whole thing with white, and then we're going to project those new textures on there to get the tiling effect. So just kind of place it where we want. Adjust my brush size. I noticed painting with mix mode, doing basically just this color, dark black on white. Mix mode comes out with a really solid dark lines. If I try to do multiply, it seems to slowly add it. I also have the strength turned up to 1, so it's as strong as it's going to get, because I only want to take one brush stroke if possible. I want to load another alpha here. Oh, but I don't have it ready, so I'm going to have to actually go into Photoshop. Oh, I'm not seeing the image that I want because I'm in the paint bucket, so I gotta go back to texture draw, and now I can load. But I have to go into Photoshop and actually make the inverted texture that I'm shooting for. So going to my downloads here, I'm going to take these this leaf alpha, drag it in here. Just duplicate the layer. I think I was being talked to at this point, so I was getting lost. Duplicate the layer. Image adjustments. Invert. And that's it. And we can just save that as a different image. I like to use bitmaps or PNGs. Bitmaps seem to take less time for your computer to deal with, but they don't have any compressions or anything like that. So we loaded that into the brush palette, and then we can just position it, scale, and rotating it. Probably need bigger coverage here. Brush this on. And I want to be careful around the edges because I don't want to clip the texture that I already have on there. So once I get most of it, then I take my brush size down a little bit. And throw some leaves down at the bottom. I'm just using pieces of this image that I think look good. So you could take a lot simpler images, basic shapes, and just make black and white images of them. You could take like pictures of things and put it into Photoshop, use the loop tool and create a new layer and fill it with black and white, and then you have yourself alphas. Lots of little pieces, you can build up a lot of detail pretty easily. And it's kind of a simple thing, but the design makes it look a lot more complicated. I'm going to load in my original alpha. Oh, that's the wrong one. Throw some designs up here. Moving around and rescaling these images can be kind of awkward sometimes. This image is kind of large for this space, so I start getting some overlap, so I kind of readjust and do my best to get the effect that I'm going for. That's a little better. some flaws I don't really like. Try to fix this here. I probably should have moved that light out of the way so you didn't see that line through the image. I could have painted over this dot, but I kind of liked it being there, so I just left it. And take that off. I'm just going to hand paint stuff. Some basic touch up. If we go into edit, we can select objects and hit H to hide them. And then make sure you select what you want to paint on next. Switch back to texture paint mode. Now you see if we paint here, all the objects are still here. We're painting over. We didn't get the mask effect that we wanted. But right here, once you turn this on, you only see the objects that are selected. The hidden objects are still hidden. So we can actually just drop the paint bucket on it. I'm at a bad angle, it's not clicking. Oh, mix. There we go. I have a little bit of a defect in the texture here. So I did the opposite here, and I just brought up a white paintbrush and paint off the over paint. And part of that seemed to be because I used a paintbrush. The fill bucket doesn't seem to do that, so that's what we're going to do for the rest of this. Is we're just going to select the last few loops. And we might as well grab this too. So grab that. I don't need to grab the bottom of it, I'm not worried about that. So, oh yeah, we want to grab the top. Alright, so invert selection, H, A, select all, go back to texture paint. And now I can just fill with black. And then Alt H to bring everything back. It seems to make it look like my texture's gotten screwed up in places, like it's cloudy and stretched, but it honestly comes out fine. It sure helps if you don't stretch your object any. If you were able to use loop slide, you'll get a better result, or plan your loops better than I did. But we're going to save that color grid out. Just give it some unique name so I know what it is. Main alpha. And we're going to pull that up in Photoshop. I'm going to apply the main alpha here, so that's going to be our alpha image. And then I'm going to copy this into Photoshop and I'm going to make a bump out of it. So just duplicate layer. And just make sure all this extra space is black. I can't really do that because I copied the layer. I should have just created a new layer. Whatever, we'll just paint it in real quick. I selected by color, select the black and create a new layer. Just fill it with white. And create another new layer. And I'm going for 50% gray-ish. And I'm going to throw that underneath. Drag that down. I go for 50% gray in case maybe I want to use that for a displacement map. So hit 90 degrees. We're creating a emboss. Gonna play around with this a little bit. And I have it set for inner bevel. I need to switch that to emboss. You could do this in GIMP just as easily. I don't use GIMP because I have this, but I know you can do anything you can do in Photoshop, you could do in GIMP pretty easily. It's a nice free alternative. Just trying to get the shadow effect so I get that bump. We'll save this out. I don't want to replace my original. But we're going to pull it up here. My object is inverted. I need to go to smooth shading for starters. Oops, I clicked. Smooth. Alright, now it looks smooth. But now I need to invert this. I have a transparency on there. Make sure my alpha is good. Oh, there we go. Well, that's neat. I'm going to flip these around because that's the effect that I wanted to get. And I'm not getting the bump effect I wanted. There we go. So now it's all the bump seems to look pretty good. Now pull that transparency layer off there. I'm just going to duplicate my principal. There you can adjust the second color completely independently. So you could do a lot of different effects with this. You can adjust the roughness, the color, and come up with an effect that you like. You might want the whole thing to be a metallic color, but change the roughness to make it look like they're like it's been brushed after it's been had the emboss applied to it. Uh, there's a lot of things. Those little details really make things pop, but I think this blue looks really cool on there, so I'm going to leave it like that. And there I have a defect. When I created that bump in Photoshop, see that gray outline? I need to select that, and at the moment I'm confused, so I don't realize that's why I have that issue. So I'm resaving my alpha because it's probably a good idea to do, but it doesn't actually help. It takes me a minute to find it. About this point, I'm thinking, I wonder what's causing that. So I pull my bump texture up and then selected that whole area and just go to scale, transform scale, just scale it so that's out of my image area. Now let's look at it. It's better. Awesome.